So I'm just going to dive right into Dagger, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the slide deck, and then we'll do a demo. You guys are welcome to interrupt and ask questions anytime. I'm going to warn up front that this is still a new product to me. It's also very new, as to the product itself. It's open source, it's free, but it's still definitely in development. One thing I will say before I get too far into it is I ran into a couple of road bumps when I was first investigating all this, and they have a wonderful Discord channel. Those guys have been nothing but helpful. So if you do decide to get involved with this and tinker with it, it is undergoing a lot of change, but their Discord channel is quite helpful. So I just kind of want to give a quick heads up. So we'll dive right in. So I just blatantly stole these right off their webpage because I'm not going to rewrite it when they have it perfectly succinctly done. So what is Dagger IO? They encapsulate all your project's tasks and workflows into simple Dagger functions written in your programming language of choice. When they say language of choice right now, they support Golang, Python, and TypeScript. And then behind that, it is, they package your Dagger functions into a module to reuse into your next project or share with a community. So we're going to step through all this. I'm just going to kind of outline it, and then we're just going to step through. So what problem does Dagger solve? Well, the majority of pipelines, and I know we definitely have this here, use YAML, especially like GitHub Actions, which aren't necessarily portable across, CI providers. And of course, scripting in one CI provider versus another can be differential. So, if you have a lot of platforms that you're working out of that involve CI/CD, they may not necessarily be straightforward and across from platform to platform. So that this aims to solve that issue. The second thing, which I can personally attest to, is developers have to push and pray instead of being able to test and build code locally and seeing near instant feedback from their delivery pipelines. They have to wait and hope for a green signal from pipelines running on remote servers. And I can get with this all day. And the interesting part of this is what drove me to find the answer. I was digging around one evening and I was like, there's got to be a way to do some of this work locally and develop in my local PC versus, let's just push and test and push and test. And, that takes time and it's frustrating because you're waiting, you're watching, you're like, there's another arrow, an error, I missed a comma, whatever it is, right? That's what drove me to start digging in and looking for an answer. And then I'll show you where I stumbled into all this. But to that end, it was the local side that really interested me right out of the gate. And then once I saw what this thing was kind of capable of, I was like, wow, I can put this to work. And I spent like an entire Saturday just sitting in my office downstairs tinkering with this thing to come up with a demo to show Gordon on like a Monday. And I was able to kind of prove my point. So that's kind of a little bit of where I got involved in this. And the next piece of that puzzle is like, how does Dagger solve this problem, right? They solve it by running your application delivery pipelines in containers. And while this is nothing new, we've been able to run containers and, Docker and things like that inside of pipelines for a while. The way that Dagger does this is definitely different than anything I've seen before. And so their last point is a Daggerized pipeline runs the same way locally or on your provider, resulting in faster feedback and elimination of, as they put it, last minute surprises. So I'm going to step to the next slide where I give you a little bit of an architecture of this, right? This is a very high level overview. It's very simplistic, but it gets the point across. On the left, we have my local environment, which is encapsulated by, if you will, on a Windows box, I have some local environment variables. I have Docker Desktop running, and Docker Desktop is also running the Dagger IO engine. And then I have my repo that I've been, working on locally. But out in GitHub Actions, of course, that is CI/CD environment variables. And, you have your CI/CD Docker running the same exact engine and running the exact same files that get mounted into that container at runtime. Where the differential here, especially when they're talking about local versus, local development versus remote, you'll notice here, I've literally done this on purpose so you guys could see it. I have, in my Windows machine, I have set %hook equal to whatever Slack webhook URL that I'm working with that I want to do a Slack notification with, versus inside of my CI/CD pipeline, that's an entirely different variable where I've set it to %webhook, which is equal to a secret out of GitHub Actions. This code will run identical whether it's local or remote based on how that particular webhook is being set. So it allows me to develop exactly locally without worrying about like, well, I didn't have the exact same variable. So long as I know what it is and what it's set to, I can hand off anything I want inside of that pipeline. And if I want to run it locally, it's going to work because it's pulling the environment variable and running it once again, on that container. So it's about how those environment variables are passed into that container, and that container, which is the Dagger engine, will consume that in whatever fashion it needs to support the language or the SDK that you've written in. So I'm going to step to the next piece of this, which is, why is this important? Like, why are we even interested in this, right? Well, I don't know anyone in the room, and if I do find someone, I'll give them a gold star that likes YAML. The fact of the matter is that you miss one space, you miss one indentation, you miss anything, and of course your pipeline's broken. You got to go back, and sometimes you can't see those spaces, right? In your editor. So YAML can be quite nuisancey, although it is used everywhere, and there's linters for it and all that. I understand, but sometimes it can be a little bit problematic. The next piece, which is one of the things that really drove me to get interested in this, is that the logic, whether it be basic or complex, is handled all behind the scenes by Golang or Python, not in the CI/CD pipeline. I don't know how many times I've tried to do something similar to like a try catch if, or try catch finally, or something along those lines, inside of GitHub Actions, and they just don't necessarily support that kind of logic. I'm not saying that you can't create it, but it's not easy to do, right? And I would much rather let the language, whether it be Golang or Python, that's where I can let it shine and say, look, I can do a try catch and return, so forth and so on, much better than a very stringent pipeline, like GitHub Actions, so that we're in this position where we control all of that logic behind the scenes inside of a container. So that was one of the things that really drove me. The other thing is, of course, GitHub runners may or may not have the needed software. And while Dagger.io spins up, it looks at what dependencies are needed, and it will pull those dependencies into that container at runtime. The bonus of that, right, is anything that you run, will be downloaded, installed into that container. The GitHub runner is not, getting anything installed. You can run on any GitHub runner you want, and it's going to run the same each time because it's all being pulled into that ephemeral container. And while you may have to have some of the, you might have some of the dependencies installed locally when you're developing locally like this, it's not a requirement to have all of the libraries, so long as you have enough to write the code to, say, hey, I know I'm going to need the format library in Golang, so I'm just going to add it, right? It doesn't have to be installed on my machine because I'm not running Go locally. So that's really nice. I can't count how many times I've been in a position where I needed a tool or a particular library or a particular PowerShell module installed into GitHub Runner, only to find out that I couldn't get it installed because some dependency or maybe a restriction of some sort. So this kind of takes away some of that problem. And then by the nature of that statement, installing software on a runner may or may not work. And so at least I can control how I'm developing this particular piece of code to understand that if I can probably get it into that container, it should work in the pipeline, versus getting it to work on my local machine and then finding out I can't get that software to run on a runner. So that's another piece of that puzzle. And for the record, this is geared more at ad hoc scripting and coding, and not necessarily Terraform, Ansible, those kind of tools. Those kind of stand alone on their own. But in our nature of the NetOps team, we tend to build, how do I put this, we build a lot of custom solution around tools that we have so that we can leverage information to put into pipelines to do things like issue certificates, or work on doing things along the lines of like maybe some self-service work around getting some information back from some of the network appliances that we have. So it's more geared at that type of work than it is something that's already standalone like Terraform and Ansible. The other huge bonus is that for both Golang and Python, there's about 1 million modules out there. Pick your poison. They may not be good. They may be the best. You have to try and each out. But I'll talk more about that in a moment as I go through this. But there are plenty for both. As a side note, the link in the bottom is a link to the YouTube video that kind of kicked me off when I was digging around on this. You may want to go watch that video if you're interested in this more. He gives a much more detailed description than I will. But that was extremely informative. And the minute I was sitting there, like I was like, okay, I see where this is going. I've got to go get this installed now. So I'll move to the next slide. So for example, when you're looking at YAML and you're looking at pipelines and those type of things, this is a good example of, I was doing some work, with PowerShell and Jira in our certificate pipeline, and there isn't necessarily a good or well-written module for PowerShell that says go interact with Jira on the cloud, right? So this is two screenshots, and there's still another one I could have put in here because of how long this particular piece of code is. But this is all sitting in my pipeline, right? And while I know how to understand and read it, not necessarily everyone on my team is going to look at this and go, "Oh, I see where the problem is. I can come in here and adjust." This is a lot of JSON, and it's a lot to consume and a lot to deal with. And like I said, when I tell you there's one more screenshot, there is definitely another one in there. And the reason I point that out is this is while it works, and don't get me wrong, I'm happy with the code, this is very wordy and very hard to disseminate inside of a YAML file, right? You're looking at this going, well, it's PowerShell, it's running, but how do you frame out that JSON easily and understand that inside of a YAML file, right? So you take something like this that's very hard to understand, very hard to read, but works, and you take that and you turn it into literally the YAML on the left, which is check out my repo so that I have the information that I need, file-wise to work with, and call Dagger. This is much more succinct, right? And this particular workflow is backed by this Go code, which actually does the same thing. It opens up in Jira and says insert a comment. That is way more succinct because someone has done the work to wrap up that module for Jira. So they've wrapped up that API and turned it into a module that you can download for Golang, and then you're in a position to consume that. And then, so you're saying, okay, well, let's just go run this particular Dagger function or Dagger module we've written, and then we want to send in, what not ticket number we want to write, etc., which is all backed by this code, which is much more succinct by a long shot than the PowerShell code that I wrote. So you let someone else do the heavy lifting of wrapping up that API into a function inside of Golang or Python. And now you're in a position just to consume that module. Much more simplistic. So I tried to come up with a couple, 3, 4 ideas, that said, hey, what could you do with this, right? Like, what makes it interesting? And one of them is that, like, there is a Python module out there that will parse Cisco conf files. And I've put a link in there to that because I've used it in the past. But it'd sure be interesting to take this and Daggerize it, right? And put myself in a position where I'm running Python inside of one of these Dagger containers. And I'm able to say, hey, if one of the CLP team comes to me and they're like, is this particular subnet available? Well, I could certainly parse all that out. Or if someone comes back and says, hey, could you tell me what the ACL looked like, for this, based on pertinent information that I could use with that module, I'd be able to run that all as a pipeline without installing any dependencies other than making sure that this guy, the actual Cisco conf parse was installed inside the container, which it will do automatically, and then be able to return that back in the pipeline. This is my idea of like kind of where we're going as NetOps to say, can we self-service, right? And how could I self-service that and hand that back? And what tool could I use that with without having to build a whole bunch of dependency-based, GitHub runners or making sure that libraries are installed every time, that kind of thing. The other idea was, one of the things I've been working on is there's a Golang Jira module that is wrapped around the entire cloud based part of Atlassian, and that puts me in a position where I can interact without having to write all the API code. I simply say, go get an issue, return that issue, do something with that data from the issue, now update that issue, and you know what, let's go ahead and close it, the ticket's done. And I could do that all from a pipeline, once again, leveraging a module that someone's written, right? So there's that power in letting someone else do that heavy lifting and saying, I'm going to wrap this API up so that you can use it as just straight up Golang or Python code. I tried to think of like a super simple, and I know this is like a really simplistic one. There is a Go generate password package for Golang. You can literally call this without installing Go on the runner or anything along those lines, just install this package inside of Dagger, and you can generate random passwords in your pipeline without having to install or write any code other than saying, use this package to go generate it and return it, right? And I know that's a simplistic one, but it gives you an idea of like, how can I just plug in something simple? where I could leverage this. And the other thing that maybe is more extreme, is an idea that, Golang is really good for running like small web servers or maybe small SQL boxes on the fly. If you need a web server to interact with on the fly inside your pipeline, rather than creating all of the Docker files and the work that would go to stand up that container inside the pipeline, just leverage Golang to actually say, hey, I want to set up an HTTP server and do this work, and then when it's done, it would just be all ephemeral and tear itself down at the end of the pipeline. So that's just a few quick ideas, right? The idea is just to get you guys thinking. I'm not saying that these are the right use cases. I'm not saying that these are bad or good. I'm just saying these are 3 or 4 I came up with. So that's what I have for this part of it. Does anyone have any questions around that before I start demoing?
We did have one question from Anthony. Do you want to ask it, Anthony?
Yeah.
If Anthony doesn't, I will ask. Anthony says, how does this compare to a tool like Cake? Have you heard of Cake before, Shannon?
So I have. I've seen Cake first time in my life lately, just a few weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, it's a Cake PHP, I'm assuming. And if that's the case, then it's more of a framework around web tooling, unless I'm wrong. So I would have to get confirmation back that's what he's asking about.
No, Cake builds.
Okay.
There's its own build framework that is similar to what Dagger does from what I've seen so far anyway. So
okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, so that would be something new for me.
we wrap all our snowflakey stuff in the Cake and then just call it. So
Okay. Makes sense.
And I have also seen ACT, which is like a local GitHub Actions validator. It does a similar thing where it spins up like a container and runs your action locally, and it's just kind of rough around the edges. This looks much more smooth, and maybe that's just Shannon's expertise here, but it looks quite a bit better than Act.
Well, and that was the thing, right? Like, for me, the interesting piece of this was the fact that the way that they do this work, which I'll be stepping through here in just a second, is they actually build the container and pull in all the files and stuff on the fly versus, kind of how do I put this? Like some kind of mangled mount points and, like I got to figure out how to get the code in there. It's just like a one-stop, let's just put it all in the container and go kind of shop, if you will, is the best way I know to describe it. So any other questions before we get into demo?
I think I have a curveball for you. Let's see about this. So
you probably get me.
We'll see. Mostly when we run our actions, they're not on like Ubuntu latest. We're using internal runners that are using our own AMIs or images or whatever. Is there any kind of support for running a container from an ACR like that might match our runners in Azure?
So actually I tested running this inside of our runners and it works to a point, and I didn't run down this gamut of whitelisting everything yet. The problem is that when you run things with Golang, they have a Golang proxy that does all the downloading in the background of all the dependencies, and that is not whitelisted. So it's something I'm going to have to try to get whitelisted if we're going to pursue it. So it ran, everything went up until the point when I tried to download the dependencies.
Cool. Okay. And that makes sense. And if we wanted to say like use the container image that we actually deploy over on the AKS side, is that possible? Can you say like use the container from this place?
I believe so, based on my conversations with the people on Discord about it, because I ran into that problem with the Go proxy stuff, and I was like, look, I'll have to whitelist this, and there's a lot of effort. Could I do something like this? And they started running down a path of like, well, you could certainly modify the container. You could do this, you could do that. And I was like, okay, so it's there, to be done.
That is super cool. Okay, I don't have any other questions. Awesome, thanks, Shannon.
You bet. So I'll preface this with saying, this is my own personal, GitHub account, and all I've done is just, upload the workflows ahead of time. There's nothing else in this demo as far as code. I'm developing in VS Code, and so a couple things just before you get going on this, and let me pull up my notes over here so I make sure I get it all right. So if you're going to do any of this work, there's a couple prerequisites, right? You're going to have Dagger IO installed locally so that you can run the Dagger software. It's for Windows, it's literally like Terraform, download, put in path. If you're going to run it, once again, local, you're going to have Docker desktop installed. So I am running that local on my machine. And then, of course, do any kind of Golang work or testing or anything like that, or Python, of course, I'd want that language installed. So pretty much that's the quick prereqs. So basically have Dagger, have Docker, and have your language of choice ready to go. That's about it in a nutshell. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone down. Actually, I've already cloned this repo. I apologize. Repo's cloned, and so you can see we've got 2 workflows and no other files. So I wanted to walk you through what it looks like just to set up a module, and just so you see it's really not that convoluted or overly tough. So at this point, the repo is just here, so we'll just step through it. So I'm going to go down here to my command line. I'm pasting these so you guys don't have to be painful and watch me type. So we're in our Dagger demo. I'm going to make a Dagger IO folder. You could name that anything you want. I just happen to name it that. We'll change. Guess you're going to see me type. And now we're going to do a make dir demo. CD demo. So basically now all we have is we just have a folder that is called Dagger IO that has a folder in it called demo. Nothing else about it, nothing special. So one of the things that Dagger has you do is they have you initialize that folder. So what it's doing now is it's actually spinning up the container under a Docker container, and it's saying, okay, I'm going to initialize this module. And all it simply really does is put down the requirements for what's needed. So it creates a Dagger JSON file, gives it this, and then of course it gives it the engine version, and that's it. So they spin that up for you so that you're not over there creating all this. And then you're going to end up telling it that you want to develop as what SDK. So in my case, I'm going to use Golang. This one's a little bit more involved. So what it does actually spins it back up, and then it will initialize this demo directory with all the files and every item that Dagger needs to run or to understand, right? So now you can see we have this Dagger folder with all this information. The only thing that we care about inside of here is the main.go. And what they've done ahead of time is they've generated a demo function so that you can just come in here and wipe this out and you're ready to go. You don't have to start in with, do I put package here and so forth and so on. They've just kind of framed it, right? They've already given you 2 particular functions to work with. In this case, we're not going to deal with them at all. But what I wanted to do was add in a simple function just so you guys could see what this looks like. So what I'm going to do, let's see, all the way to here. So this is a very simple hello world function that we all love as developers, scripters, coders. And so what we're doing here is we're importing context, which actually isn't needed in this one. Sorry, I pasted that in. So all we need is the format package for Go. So whenever this initializes that container, it's going to be like, oh, I need to go get this format, module from the internet and download it into this container. And all I'm simply doing is I'm saying, okay, call hello with a greeting, which is a string, a name, which is a string, return a string, set the message equal to format this string as I see fit, which in this case is, whatever the greeting and name is separated by a comma, and then return that message. That's all this is really doing. And so at this point, we're in a position where I can save this file and it's all local, right? And if we do a Dagger functions, what we should get back is a simple function that says hello with a description of hello world function. So what it's doing right now is it's taking all that code that you see in that Dagger folder and it's layering into a container. So it actually uploaded everything that we see inside of here into that container so that it could all be executed, right? And then it went out and downloaded the format and then executed the Go code as part of its entry point for that container. Well, what message or what the Dagger functions does, it says just return all the functions that are available within this particular module. So here's the name of which is hello. And then here's the description, which is a hello world function. It is quite interesting. I've never done Golang up until this. It's kind of interesting. Like a remark actually comes out as like descriptions for the function, which is kind of interesting to me. That's new for me anyway. So if we say we have that function now, we should be able to actually call that function and say, let's go run it to actually return. So at this point, I'm just going to paste this in. So we're going to tell Dagger to call the hello module. I'm sorry, take that back. The hello function. using the demo module, which we created under demo here. And then we're going to pass in from the command line that the greeting is equal to hello and the name is equal to Robert. So if we hit that and we run it, what we should get back is a hello, comma, Robert. And there you go. So one thing of note is if these containers are not ephemeral, like if we left these containers sitting out there running where we just ran code against them all the time, they would become caching and they will become much faster because they don't have to reload the code. Right now I'm building it every time. So just keep in mind that that's why it feels, you're like, wow, you printed, hello Robert, and it took you like however many seconds, right? I could do that PowerShell faster, but the point is to prove how to pass things in, how to leverage those inputs, not necessarily the speed because of the nature of how I'm rebuilding constantly. So another side note of this is like, okay, if I don't like, if I want to just change, the greeting from hello to hi in the same name, I just wanted you guys to see what it looks like to change these things. So here we are, we're running the container, ready to go again. And we should get a hi, Robert, this time instead of a hello. And you can see it down at the bottom. And vice versa, if I would just want to leave it as hello and change the name Joe, pretty straightforward stuff. This is meant to be very simplistic, just give you an idea of how you would pass variables and consume them inside of a function. So far, so good?
I have a question, Shannon. So what container is it using? Did we specify some container for it to run, or is it defaulting to something?
It defaults to their Dagger engine. So by default, when you run Dagger, it will be like, where's your Docker desktop? Oh, there it is. Let me go get this image and download and run it for you.
It's like lightweight Linux, I imagine?
Yes, I think it's, I wouldn't swear to this, but it might be Alpine.
Okay, cool.
So at this point, we have a hello world, pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so now let's get down to some more interesting stuff that we'll want to talk about. So let me go grab some code here.
And just for narration's sake, it looks like GitHub Actions is currently broken. So like being able to test locally is pretty cool when GitHub Actions breaks so often.
Good to know. So I've added in quite a bit more code, but we'll step through it so everyone kind of understands. We've imported various modules. I need some stuff around context and JSON and formatting and string conversion and time. And then there is a Slack module around, that's been developed for Go. So we're also going to be pulling that in as well. So here's the hello world function that we had a second ago. I've got a new one that sets the name dimension in Slack. And so what we do is we say, set name, and if name is blank, and you didn't send name, set it to generic name, so we do a little error trapping there. Here we're saying set the message that you want to send in Slack. So here's our default message or whatever message I sent. And then here's the work where we're actually saying, okay, Slack, go out and send a Slack message using the Slack module from Golang. I want you to use the name that we set above, the message that we set above, and fire it off out to a webhook. That's effectively what we're doing here. So pretty straightforward overall. Now, I understand that there's GitHub Actions to do Slack and there's PowerShell stuff to do Slack. This is just an example of how to use a module and leverage it inside of a pipeline. I understand that Slack can be done a lot of different ways. So if we do our Dagger functions now, you'll notice we get a much different list.
And Shannon, did you have to write this, or was this something you found online?
I wrote it.
Cool.
And
was there a publicly available function to do this that we could have done, and this is just kind of demonstrative?
Yes, yeah, there is definitely stuff out. In fact, Dagger, believe it or not, has the Notify library built into Dagger so that you can leverage, like, I don't know if you've ever looked at Notify before or not, but I have leveraged it in the past. You can do like pushover, push bullet, Slack, I mean, you name it. Whatever notification mechanisms out there is all rolled into that library. And Dagger has already put that in as a module. So you can literally say, give me the Notify library from Dagger. It will pull it down from Dagger. And then you're in a position where all you gotta do is put in your Slack keys and turn it loose. That's it.
Super cool.
Yep. So now you can see where we have all these functions. Please ignore the message and name at this point. That's part of our struct up here where I'm saying there's a key value for demo structs that I could return these back. And why that picks it up as a function, I don't have that answered this second. But you'll notice we have a send Slack message, a set message, and a set name, which lines up with the 3 items that we talked about. Quick note, because this one took a beating on me during testing, you'll notice that the set name, set message, and send Slack, but you'll notice everything down here is all hyphenated, right? It took me a while to understand that anywhere there's a capital, they put a hyphen by default. They do that by design, and all function calls are lowercase, no matter what you type up here. So just keep that in mind when you're like, I keep calling the function, I can see it, but it doesn't run. Yeah, there's nothing worse than posting a Discord channel and you're like, this is all broke and I don't understand. And then 5 seconds after you post, you realize what's going on. They're like, yeah, you got it right. So that was my entertainment for one of the nights I was messing with it. So once again, we're in a position where we can call these and we can say, let's go do some work. Now, the interesting piece about this is what I wanted to demonstrate in this particular setup. You'll notice that we have a set name, a set message, and a send Slack message, right? But you'll notice how we're getting the M name and the M message down here, right? So I'm putting the name and the message are all coming from these up here. Inside of Dagger, this is what they call chaining. And so I will be calling all 3 functions. And since this return can be serialized into JSON, it will hold that in this struct or this key value mechanism up here. So I can say demo.name, or in my case, I'm describing demo as M as a variable, is just main, if you will. And so I'm saying that basically m.name right here is equal to whatever we output or return. So it's held as part of this key value, right? This allows you to chain inside of Golang or inside of Dagger, where you're in this position where you can say, I want this, this, and this to all be calculated, and then go do that, if you will. So that's what we're demonstrating here. And so what we'll do is I will send out for this piece right now. So what I'm going to do, I don't know why that didn't send that way. A second. So we'll do it like this then. There we go. So what we're doing is we're telling Dagger to call in our module the function called setName with a name of Robert, a set message with a message of testing, and a send Slack message with a webhook of hook. Now, what I've already done in my case is I've already set an environment variable that looks like this. I'm just going to paste it for a second. This is my hook for the particular channel, right? For I have a test Slack channel, and this is the webhook for it. This is simply set in command prompt just like this, so it's in Windows. So %hook is equal to my webhook in this case. So now if we run this, and I will pull over Slack so that you can see. So what it's doing is just calling each one of those functions, and it's setting the name to Robert, the message to testing, and my webhook. And right there at 135, there's my Slack channel, a notification with what we put in, right? So pretty interesting, you're able to pass all that along. Well, one of my first immediate thoughts around that was like, well, what would happen if I was doing something in a pipeline and it didn't send a name, like it just sent a blank because maybe the pipeline didn't return some information. So what I ended up doing was setting it up so all it does is send a blank here, right? And that becomes, this is basically an optional value. I can set it as nothing or set it as something, it doesn't matter. And you're going to notice that when I sent it this time, we got generic name because of the nature of how this Golang is written up here for name. It's like basically, if it's not equal to empty, set name to whatever they passed in. Otherwise, set name to generic name and return that so that we hold that to pass in down here, aka chaining, right? So what if, the same thing applies if we're doing something like this, where we say, I want to set the name, but I don't want to set the message. The same thing's applying. We're going to rerun again, and this time around, we're going to get a generic message instead of a testing message. So we'll let that pop up. And you can see now we have a name. And then what if my pipeline returned no variable at all for either? Well, at least my code was still run, and I've got some defaults in there. right? So here we are not setting a name or a message. We're going to turn this loose. And their generic name with a generic text. Okay. So pretty straightforward in regard to that. Any questions so far? Good. All right. So one thing of interest around this is you'll notice it didn't take me long to initialize it. Didn't take me long to get it going. It's all running locally, right? Everything's there. And they do offer a traces situation for this, that if you have a cloud key, which I have set, I can actually go see the trace of what it did during that run. And you can see here where, hey, it took an intake of nothing and a message of nothing. And here's the webhook we sent. Here's the time in between all the actions that it took to get this done. And it's actually real time. Like if I'm running this, and we may do it here in a second. In fact, I'll do it now just for entertainment so you can see it. It actually real time updates, which is interesting. So if we look at the local, you can see it's already here. And if we watch it, it'll actually keep uploading, keep updating this page as that whole thing is running to send that Slack channel. This is pretty interesting. So if you're having some piece that's taken forever, or you're like, why, what's going on, or where was the error, this is a nice way of getting that information down the road. And it also does the same from the CI/CD side. So we'll go ahead and see if we get lucky. Maybe GitHub Actions will be running. We'll try. So at this point, all we've done is just created the Dagger point. The workflows are already there. So I'm going to go ahead and get these uploaded. So we'll just submit that all up.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, by all means.
So I thought you were running locally, and yet you've got a cloud service that's watching the transactions?
If I want it to, yes. And I just did it for demonstration.
Oh, okay. So you turned that on. I see.
Yep. Yeah, you don't have to use it. It is not a requirement.
Understood.
Yep. So if we look at all this guy now, we're going to have all of our stuff up here, right? And let me talk about the workflows a little bit, and then we'll see if we get lucky and get it running. I have a hello and a Slack, right? It's demonstrating the exact same things we've done locally. Only two things that we have going on, and we have two secrets. One is the Dagger token for uploading to their metrics, and then the webhook for Slack, because of course I wouldn't want to hard code that into a code. So here, what I've done is I've created two inputs inside of GitHub Actions for the hello, which is the same thing that we're using locally, which is greeting and name. You'll notice that the required is true, so I'm going to force you to put those in because I haven't written any error code for that particular function. So I got to make sure that if you're going to kick this thing off, you got to give me the information we should be getting. Running on, the GitHub runners over at GitHub. And then basically, this is where I would say this is where it kind of shines, right? Is I want to run with this action. Here's my workspace. I'm pointing it to the directory where all my code is stored. And then I want to use the latest module or the latest version from them. My module is demo, which we talked about over here. That's the name of the module. I want to call, and then here we are again with our arguments, which in my case will be the hello function with a greeting of whatever you put in up here with a name of whatever you put in for the workflow. So we'll see if we get lucky, see what we get here. So here comes our hello world. And so.
And everyone keep your fingers crossed because this might be broken. We'll see.
So we'll run. So what it's doing at this point is it's downloading the Dagger engine, sets it up inside a Docker container, just like it is on my local machine to the letter. Exact same engine, exact same everything. And what it'll do is it'll initialize that and it'll look at it just like it did on my machine. It's like, oh, I need the format, part of this Golang library. So let me go and get that downloaded. Let me get that installed. Let me stage everything. It's also connecting on the back end to our trace. So you can already see here where it's actually doing that update, which is interesting. So we'll let it run here. As you can imagine, runners aren't as fast as my local in terms of this, so it takes it a minute to initialize. That's why I think if I was going to leverage this, sometimes I might end up doing this, where it's standing. There's our full high GitHub, just like we passed into our pipeline. right? And so we come over here, you can see we've already done everything. Everything looks good. Took it 38 seconds, roughly 39 seconds to initialize the engine and get everything going. And then within, less than a second later, it was already outputting the data, which is pretty interesting. So if we do the same now for our Slack side, I'll show you how I did this just slightly differently to represent this in this meeting. So in our case, these are not required. You'll notice there's no red stars, so you can leave these blank, just like I showed you in my local demo. But in this case, I'm just going to fill it out, and yeah, that'll work. And so we're going to run it. So once again, doing the exact same thing I was doing locally to the letter. So we're initializing, it's downloading. In the meantime, hopefully we should start seeing a CI here in just a second, because it's still, yeah, there we go. So you can see exactly what I called, my name from GHA, that was all for the input of the pipeline, what the webhook's going to be. And now we wait a second for it to initialize, because you can see it takes a minute. And the interesting part of this is like, if we had them standing as like standing Dagger.io containers, then we can make calls against it where it would begin to cache this stuff, and it would be much faster. So I don't know, I might consider that, as a standalone down the road. And then what we got was it actually did its work. And if you look right over here, there we are at 144. We got my name and whatever information and, from GHA. So that about sums it up, from this point on. The thing I really want to wrap up with is this is not a replacement for everything, but I hope I was able to demonstrate the fact that I was to do everything locally the exact same as I did it in the pipeline. And that puts me in a position where I don't have to go commit, try all day long going, well, messed up, it didn't do this, or I erred on that. At least I can see it locally, right? And the major advantage for me is being able to get away from having to worry about trying to handle all of the logic with like, if error or this, all the ternary work that you would normally do in a pipeline to try to track that can all be done now on the back-ended side of this. And so for me, that's interesting, right? And the other piece of that puzzle, of course, is leveraging the modules that these various languages, whether it be Python or Golang, there's about 1 million modules out there, pick your poison. And if you can certainly get someone else to do the heavy lifting where it'll simplify it for you, this is much easier to deal with overall. And it's a lot less heavy on the runners because you're not having to install everything like we talked about earlier. And it puts you in a position where you can say, okay, I'm going to do this locally. It works, put it out there. It's working in the remote. I'm good. Like why am I writing all this extraneous code when someone else has already done all the module work down the road? So that's kind of my quick and dirty summary on that. And I think that pretty much wraps it up for me.
That was a fantastic demo, Shannon. This is super cool. Do you have a use case for this yet? I saw Certbot. Is this where Certbot's going to live?
Yeah. So ideally, what I'm looking to do is I want to leverage this with Jira and Forms and the self-servicing of certs. So it puts me in a position where I don't have to write all that Jira work that says, go do all this ticket work, get all this information. How do I gather that with an API and sort and sift, right? Someone else has already done all that work. So that way I'm in a position where I'd be like, go get the form, get the data from the form. Okay, return all that data. Now pass it off to acme.sh. Okay, now we're done. We got the cert. Okay, now rerun Dagger again. Go update the ticket, return back the information, let them know it's already been issued. This is where it's stored. And if you need anything else, let us know and close the ticket. That's like my end game right out of the gate.
That is super cool. Did anybody have any questions while we're on? Sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. I'm like, if anyone's got a question, I know it's a lot to consume. I totally get that. And it's a little bit more developer oriented in some aspects, but for people like us that write a lot of ad hoc code to bridge items here at this place, I think this is an interesting tool to be able to do that without having to worry about what the runner looks like, what software is installed, what language is on there, all that. right? Let's just go do it in something I'm familiar with. And a lot of people like Python, so that's a good one. I forced myself to learn some Go to do this, and it was interesting. I enjoyed it. So it's something else I can put in my pocket to tinker with.
Heck yeah. Okay, questions from anyone before we wrap this up? Going once. All right. Silence means you did an excellent job. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just came to how are the secrets handled? So does it automatically get all the secrets, or we have to explicitly pass it?
So in my case, I've got secrets automatically added as part of the GitHub repo that it's running from. So you'll notice that I'm leveraging the secret here. But on my local machine, I've got to have that somewhere that I can leverage it, right? And so when we look at the way that I was calling this earlier, you'll notice this %hook, that is an environment variable on my local machine called hook, and it's got the webhook for Slack. So this code runs the same up until I pass it either from my local, or in the case of the pipeline, we pass it as a secret right here. So the code will run identically. It's just how did I get that webhook to it from my local versus my remote and pipeline, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.
And it looks like Alex, sorry, I about called you Alan there, Alex. Alex has a question. Does your Dagger config allow you to specify the Golang version?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I ran into a problem with that about a week ago, and I had to adjust version. So yes, you can definitely do it.
A quick question. So is there a way to put a breakpoint and troubleshoot, like if something happens in the, like let's say like in the Python or Go, is there a way to put a breakpoint and troubleshoot the script from here?
So I don't know if you can put a breakpoint and hold the container, but I do know that Dagger has some mechanisms in their documentation around shooting and being able to get that information of where the problem is. And it's similar in design, if I remember correctly, to a breakpoint. I would have to go reread the docs, but they do have a mechanism to help you troubleshoot to answer that question.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. And I'd really encourage everyone that does a lot of ad hoc coding like this, or that wants to containerize a lot of their code and get away from having, really large, unreadable YAML. Yours included is one of those, because of the nature of what I was working on. I would encourage you just to set it up and tinker with it and see what you can get it to do. The minute I saw what it could do, I was like, I've got to get this moving. I've got to get it running, because I think it gives us a lot of flexibility in a pipeline where not only is it the same whether I'm developing locally or if I'm running it remotely, but it puts me in a position where I can kind of standardize on a language that will most likely get the job done, instead of me going, well, do I use Bash here or PowerShell there? It's a consideration anyway, I think.
Totally. And what we would do now, if this was a public-facing conference, is say, Shannon, where can folks find you if they're interested? And of course, we can find you on Slack. But do you publish any blogs? Is there any repo or Slack room related to this where I can follow if I'm really curious about this stuff?
Yeah, I haven't posted anything. My repo, I guess, theoretically is alive, because I just put it out my own personal. Let's see, probably, I don't know if that's public or not. Yeah, it looks like it's private, but I could set it to public where someone could poke around at it and drop a link.
If there's no secrets, yes, please. If there is, no worries.
Yep. Yeah, there's really nothing in there other than what is the secret for the webhook, but I could take that out and then people can put their own in. It's not a problem.
Awesome.
So I don't want this to come across negative, and
That's
it might.
okay.
So I think you've done, this is an awesome demo, like really. But I do have concerns that there's tracing over a cloud service, right? Especially if you're sending webhooks in clear text, that might be problematic from a security perspective.
Yep. So you can turn that off. It's not required. I put it on for the demo. Yep.
And where do you turn it off and on? Just, in case somebody's playing around and
yeah,
wanna make
definitely.
sure.
Yeah, so if you look at this and we bring up our hello YAML, you'll notice that there is a Dagger token that's listed for the cloud token right here. If you
Uh-huh.
remove that line, no telematics sent.
Oh, okay. So where does the actual hook for your Slack? Actually, we're looking at the hello. Where's the webhook for Slack get injected?
That is injected at the pipeline run right here, and you can see that secret right here.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So basically, what you saw me run in the command line was the same thing that I was calling earlier, right? I'm calling that demo module with a set name function with this flag. And you'll notice this is how I handled if nothing is sent in the GitHub, like let's say this returned a blank for some reason, right? So if I didn't put in name, which you saw me do earlier, it just sets it to quote, quote. So we send name to quote, quote, or whatever I put in, right? So that we get that logic. But yeah, it's the exact same line, except that in this case, I'm using the secret in the pipeline versus on my local machine, this is set as an environment variable, which I'm set earlier and just sits in my environment. You could have it theoretically, you have a read from a file, whatever it takes to get that hook there. I chose environment variable myself.
Now, how would you compare like the environment for running code against a tool like Rundeck? Like, what would you? And I don't know if you're familiar with Rundeck or not.
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yep. So totally two different angles, right? So with Rundeck, a lot of times you have that centralized machine, right, that's running jobs and it's acting as like the coordinator or organizer, in the middle of Rundeck, and it's got all the creds and it's got all the pieces of code, right? And if I'm misrepresenting that, by all means, tell me, but that's how I view it. And in this case, I'm looking at pipelines where I'm doing work that I want to be able to go do a whole lot of Jira work. I can go get a form in Jira, return that data, and do some work with it, all from a pipeline with no standing infrastructure versus Rundeck that's sitting there going, do you have something for me to do? And then, of course, the cost of Rundeck is totally night and day, behind, GitHub runners, right? So that's kind of my two hot takes, if you will, when you're looking at that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
You bet. Yeah, I consider Rundeck more of a Ansible Terraform, well, not Terraform, but more of a Ansible-ish kind of tool. And this is more about like, how do I run code that doesn't have to be on a platform where I can talk to third-party APIs, or I can do some kind of internal talk and do the work, and I only need this to run for a minute or two. That's kind of my...
Yeah, no, and I'm coming at it from the view of the SRE team where they have a lot of like tasks. Hey, this particular production node is, whatever reason, is crashing. It's not behaving well. Let's take it out of the rotation. And they have a Rundeck job where they, execute a snippet of code, right? And that's exactly what you're doing here, just in a totally different context. And like you said, Rundeck is not free. It's, a little bit it's not terribly pricey, but it's, thousands per year. And you can't really test the jobs locally, right? So I could see where a lot of what the SRE team does could be done in this similar way, but they, the team is not familiar with Go as far as I know. So that might be a limitation.
And it also supports Python, so and a lot of people can kind of pick up Python, right? There's enough demonstration work out there for Python that you should be able to, if you can write PowerShell, you can deal with Python for the most part.
Right.
And and it would certainly be interesting to, see if you could take something like that and Daggerize it, as they call it in their terms, and see if you could be like, okay, I just want to go do this in Azure or on a machine. And because they do actually have a WinRM provider for Dagger, so you can leverage those PowerShell-like connections over WinRM, just like you would if you were doing Ansible. So kind of an interesting angle to be able to run that as I need a snippet of code that goes over WinRM and issues this command, could certainly be done from something inside this. And you could theoretically have all the PowerShell modules you want, if you needed to install them inside, or maybe there's a Golang or a Python module for doing that kind of work you're doing, and you'd be in a position where it would run on any runner without having to wait on software to install, right? And that's kind of the angle, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, the whole point of this was just to get people thinking. I know it's not the answer to everything, and I know it's kind of a niche, but I think it's an interesting solution to several items that are on my plate, and I can only imagine that if it's on mine, it's got to be on someone else's here, and it might be interesting for someone to just tinker with the idea and just give you guys some ideas, really more than anything.
And Ross Stout posted a question. What is the licensing model for Dagger? Is it open source enterprise?
That's a good question. Last time I checked, I thought it was open source. Let's see if they have. That's something to do with Apache. And so I don't think.
Usually these projects have both, right?
Yeah, I wasn't sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't see any like free trials or anything on the website, so it's looking very open sourcey to me.
It said Apache 2.0.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah, and they keep this thing up to date, man. This was 11.6 last week, and you can see we're already into 11.9 this week. So they are on top of building it. So they're moving fast. I know that.
Now,
Mhm.
for the endpoint, so let's say you're doing this development, but you wanted to deploy this somewhere, right? In, let's say, Azure space. Where, like, what context does it run under? Would you like have a machine out there that
So
runs these containers as necessary, or?
Yeah, I mean, all you saw me running on was a GitHub runner, right? A hosted one. I don't have any context of rights in that case. And it would be identical to how you would run things like in Azure today. You would be like, oh, I need to authenticate and get like an OIDC token, which would give me rights to go do things inside of Azure, right? So the only differential really is the fact that it's running in a container versus in the pipeline native. But you should still be able to work with a similar credentialing setup that we have today, would be my expectation. I have not tested it, but based on what I know, that's what I'd expect.
All right, we are at time, so let's call it here. Thank you so much, Shannon. This was amazing.